I'm not a tremendous believer in the paranormal, and ghost hunting isn't something that I do very often. In fact, this was the first and the last time I participated in a ghost hunt. We were just kidding around and being silly, not expecting anything really. But let me assure you, this event is wholly actual and took a very unexpected turn. This story begins in North Carolina a couple of summers ago. A friend of mine wanted to video record an apparition that was known to haunt a Civil War graveyard. It sounded fun and more exciting than sitting at home with my family playing gin rummy. The graveyard has loads of legends and urban myths, most centered around the violent Civil War history of the area. The cemetery is enormous, as thousands of Confederate soldiers had fallen in the battles around this part of North Carolina. I won't give the location, but anyone who knows North Carolina Civil War history knows this mass burial ground. It isn't a big secret. I'm just trying to be respectful. We arrived a little after 11:30 with us, thinking midnight was always the witching hour. So, we wanted to be in place with our video equipment before then. We parked down the block out of sight of the cemetery and walked through a woods so we wouldn't alert the local sheriff that we would be in there after dark. The graveyard didn't have a fence, just an ancient low stone wall with a sign stating the cemetery was open to the public during daylight hours only. It was a lovely night, with stars and a full moon for light. Let me say we're not there to disrespect anyone interred on those grounds. We approached politely and asked respectfully if any ghosts were present. May we enter? We walked down the rows of soldiers who had fallen in battle and were buried with a limestone stone to mark their human existence. We touched each marker as we walked past, asking if any spirit was present and if they could give us a sign. I don't scare easily, but this was very creepy and made me nervous about being touched by something I could not see. We did this for about an hour and then rested on a bench under an old Spanish oak. We whispered when my friend clutched my arm tightly and whispered, "What the heck?" I looked into the dark, and about 25 feet directly in front of us was a soldier in a tattered Civil War uniform. It looked dirty and bloodstained, and from what I could make out in the moonlight, was a face that was translucent pale and gaunt. He was walking like a zombie from the TV series The Walking Dead. I honestly thought someone was in a costume and was playing a prank or some kind of joke on us. The outfit was amazing, and the makeup of a living dead was spot on. He walked haltingly, and we could hear a sound like a labored breath, like what someone would make after running a mile. He was struggling to walk, which appeared so genuine. At no time did he turn to look at us. He just kept walking in the direction he was going. We sat frozen on the bench under the oak. We watched it laboriously make its way down the row of graves that led to a mausoleum, backed up to the newest section of the graveyard. Then, he vanished behind the mausoleum out of sight. We waited about 5 minutes for him to reappear on the other side, but he never did. We got up and slowly walked down the same row of graves to the back of the mausoleum, but there was nothing there but a freshly dug, empty grave. If this was a prank, the person would have been lying in the grave waiting for us. But the grave was empty, and there was nowhere else to hide. We stood there for over an hour with our video camera recording, and nothing. We have no explanation. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, just a short distance from Sturbridge. There was a cemetery just on the edge of town that predated the founding of our town. It was considerably old, and no one had been buried there since the early 1800s. It dates back to some of the earliest settlers in Massachusetts. As far as I know, no living relatives are anywhere in the area. That may be why it is poorly maintained. Many headstones had fallen decades ago, and the stones were standing in deterioration and covered in lichen and moss. and the graveyard was all overgrown with trees. It wasn't a cemetery. You would typically see people spending any time, except for the occasional stone charcoal tracers, looking for interesting outlines. It was just a cemetery on the side of a road that you might point out as you passed, saying, "Look at that old cemetery." But for us local kids, it was a place of folklore and urban legend that went back before our father's time. Stories were told around summer campfires and during sleepovers that we all learned. They were the basic ghost stories that evil spirits could be seen wandering the graveyard during the hours after darkness. It scared us as kids, but it was utter nonsense. One day, in our history class, we discussed our town's early pioneers, and the cemetery was brought up. And of course, that brought up the legends, and there were many discussions on whether they were true or not. Since it was a Friday, 2 friends of mine decided to go with me after school and see if we could verify any truth to the stories. Of course, nothing paranormal happened, but that night, something far more dreadful did. We met after dinner, and with nothing to do, we returned to the cemetery. We were in the cemetery for about half an hour, without any metaphysical apparitions or anything scary at all. We decided to stay at least 2 hours to confirm that all the stories were fake. We found a couple of headstones that leaned at a great angle to provide an excellent backrest, and we just sat and talked in whispers so that if there were any voices or sounds, we could hear them. Before long, we stopped whispering as we heard the exact sound of someone walking in the tall grass. We looked at each other, and our eyes confirmed we were all hearing it. In a second, it became very distinct, and without question, someone was walking in the cemetery. My one friend is a little bolder and said, "Hello? Is someone there?" Cold chills flooded my veins as a man's voice answered,
"What are you kids doing in my graveyard?"
My second friend quickly pipped up, "We were just hanging out doing nothing." The footsteps stopped still in the darkness outside of our night vision, and the man asked,
"Do I know you?"
We all shouted a little panicked. "No," he said.
"I'm sure that I know you. Come closer and let me see you."
I tugged at my friend's coats, and we began to run. The unseen man shouted,
"Stop! Come back here!"
We didn't waste any time, and the 3 of us just ran. And as we ran, we could hear loud footfalls behind us coming after us. When we got to the street, there was a street lamp at the cemetery entrance that we ran through to the other side of the road. And as we reached the other side, we turned and looked back, and an obese man was standing under the street lamp, and in his hand, we all could clearly see was a hatchet. We ran as fast as we could into town. My dad made a police report, but nothing was ever disclosed. A year later, some other kids discovered a rusted hatchet near one of the headstones. It made for a new urban legend still told in our town. It's my chilling nightmare. Gates of Hades. There is an American legend about a portal to Hades in Still, Kansas. I don't know if Still has a gate to Hades, but I had a very chilling nightmare a few years ago at the cemetery. Still is a nothing town in an unincorporated community in Douglas County, not far outside Lawrence. I was traveling across country with my girlfriend, and we got a motel for the night in Lawrence. It was there at a diner next to the motel. We learned about the cemetery from our waitress. It was only about 15 minutes from the motel, so it piqued our interest. That night, sometime before midnight, we drove out to the cemetery. We thought it would be a great story to tell at our university after the break. We found the cemetery following the waitress's directions, and there was really no way to get lost, as there was only one road out that direction. We parked next to an old church across the street from the cemetery and walked up a gravel road into the cemetery. My girlfriend was nervous, but it looked like any old rural cemetery in America. Just being late at night with the wind eerily blowing made it spooky. There was no locked gate or fence to jump over or anything, just a gravel road leading to footpaths. We passed several graves before we examined one to see the date and read the name. We weren't using a flashlight just to not attract attention from the road. We didn't know whether being in the cemetery after dark was okay or not. It was pretty close to a full moon, so there was plenty of light to read the grave markers. We passed many very old stones and wound our way up the hill to an old foundation that was a church at one time. The town apparently tore the church down in the 90s because it was being vandalized. Because of one legend, it was a very popular target at Halloween. According to the waitress, if you threw a glass bottle at the back of the church wall and it didn't break, Satan would appear and drag you down to Hades. We walked on the foundation, and the only thing we noticed was some really bizarre scratch marks on the old stones around the perimeter of the foundation. They were way too perfectly spaced to be made by an animal like a deer scrape, but definitely could have been made by some teenagers trying to create something spooky up there. As we walked away from the church, we saw a glass bottle with some flowers at one of the headstones, probably left by some relative earlier in the week. The flowers were pretty well wilted. My girlfriend, sometimes being a little devious, said wouldn't it be a great story to throw it against the foundation, where the back wall would have been. No one would miss this bottle. It isn't anything special, and the flowers are already dead. I resisted saying no. It would be a bad omen, especially if it didn't break, and we were laughing. "Oh, come on, silly," she said. "There's a bunch of glass back of the church already. Many people have done it. It isn't like we're making a mess for anyone that isn't already there." She quickly went over to the headstone and snatched the glass, dumping out the flowers and what water remained. I couldn't believe she would even touch the glass with how nervous she was when we entered the cemetery. As she turned to walk back to the old foundation wall at the back of the church, the creepiest sounds seemed to come from all around us. It sounded like the noise you hear when you open a pop bottle. You know, that sort of fizzy, bubbly sound. It was genuinely freaky, and the hair on my arms stood on end with the goosebumps it gave me. I'm a big outdoors nature guy, and have never heard a sound like that. We were a little jittery, and we looked around and couldn't find the source of the sound that continued for some time. It spooked us enough we just set the glass bottle on the back of the church foundation, took a picture to remember our night at Still Cemetery, and hightailed it back to the car. As we curled up to sleep the remainder of the night back at the motel, my girlfriend suddenly twitched, turned, and looked me in the eye with terror. We didn't break the glass. This chilling nightmare haunts us every night. Will we be dragged down through the gates of Hades?